Okay, welcome to the Scrutiny Programme Committee. I got apologies for absence from councillors Hannah Lawson, Jeff Jones and Gloria Tanner, and Councillor Will Thomas is giving apologies, going to be slightly late joining us. Has anybody got any other apologies for absence at all? No? Okay, we shall move on then to disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest. Anybody wish to declare an interest at all? No, I shall take that silence as in a negative. And then prohibition.
Sorry, Chair. I don't know if I was late. I've just joined. Were you declaring declaration of interest?
Yeah, we are. Sorry, Clive. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Apologies. Just going. Yeah, I have to declare a number of interests, Chair. On item 6, paragraphs 1.4, Copper Bay regeneration, 7.3, parking strategy, 7.5, work during pandemic, all decisions that I was involved in during my time as a cabinet member. And so personal and prejudicial interest, I shall be leaving the meeting. And item 14, paragraph 1.3 refers to the previous cabinet decision of December 2020, where I will also been involved in that decision. So again, I shall be leaving with the personal and prejudicial interest, Chair.
Thank you, Clive. No doubt they'll send you a form to fill in due course. Okay, thanks for that. Right, prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips. No, in that case, we shall move on to item 4, which is the minutes of the last meeting, which I shall now find on my tablet. Right, so for accuracy, on page 1, on page 2, page 3, and page 4. Can we agree that those are a true and correct record, please? Again, I shall take silence as assent. Thank you, everyone. So item 5, public question time. I understand we've had no questions received, Bridge, at all?
Correct, Chair.
Okay, right. In that case, we shall move on to item 6, which is the scrutiny of the cabinet member portfolio with responsibility for parking policy, control and enforcement. I understand we have Councillor Mark Thomas with us. And we also have, supported by Stuart Davis, the head of highways and transportation, Mark Thomas again, who's this time as the group leader in highways and transportation, and Gavin Newman, who's the parking services manager. Mark, as in Councillor Mark, do you want to make any opening introduction remarks on this at all, or do you prefer we go straight into questions?
Chair, I'll be leaving at this point before Councillor Thomas starts.
Yeah, sorry, Clive. Yes, thanks, Clive. Okay. Mark, did you want to make any opening remarks?
Yeah, I'm in your hands, Chair. Obviously, the report has been issued and circulated. I'm quite happy to go through the report or straight to questions if that's what you prefer. And thank you in advance for some of the questions that Bridge sent last night. So happy to go straight into them if that's your wish. Yeah.
We'll assume everybody's read the report and we'll head on to questions in that case. Thanks, Mark. Okay, so the first question is Councillor Peter Jones on finance. Peter.
Peter, am I visible first of all?
Are you? I can't see. I can hear you. That's the important thing.
Am I visible? Anybody? I'm having problems.
Yes, I can see you, Peter.
Sorry?
Okay.
I can see you.
Oh, good. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. You can hear me anyway. That's the important point. Yes, thank you, Mark. Very detailed and comprehensive report, and thank you and your colleagues for producing it. You will have seen that my first question relates to financial matters, particularly in relation to parking services operational budgets. I always think I can understand finance, but I didn't feel I was able to understand the table that is present in the report, which lists variously operational budgets, income targets, and actual income. I just wondered whether you or one of your colleagues could explain the interrelationship between the 3 columns of figures and what can we learn from these figures. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, if I could respond then, Chair. Yeah,
please, Mark. Yeah,
I'm quite happy to explain, although it's one of the problems with a written presentation or written format. Once it's explained to you, they are much more simple than they just portrayed in the report. But to make it even easier, can I suggest, Peter and Chair, that Gavin, who's formulated the tables, explains them just so that he gets it absolutely accurate, because I don't want to misrepresent the tables at all. So if Gavin Newman, who's present on the call, if he can, I think he's got a better way of explaining it to all members. Will do a better job of explaining it than I can. I'm happy to respond, but if Gavin is here,
Yeah, I'm here.
Defer to him if that's possible, Chair.
Thank you, Mark.
Gavin?
Yeah, certainly. So basically, the operating budget is what it costs us to run the service. Okay, so the £1,389,900 is basically what it costs us to operate the civil parking enforcement operation. The income target, that's slightly misleading, is actually a typing error. In civil parking enforcement, we don't have targets. The Traffic Management Act states that local authorities are not to have targets when it comes to civil parking enforcement. So we're not allowed to set targets in terms of the number of PCNs we issue, or for the amount of income that we wish to generate for civil parking enforcement. What the Traffic Management Act does stipulate is that local authorities should run civil parking enforcement at a cost neutral. So we should basically make enough money to cover the costs of running the service. We shouldn't be dipping into other council pots to run that service. So the 1.352 is basically the target that we have to basically cover our cost effectively. And the actual income of 1771652 is the actual money that we've received. So we've effectively made a surplus of just over 300,000. And it's the same principle with car parks and with park and ride. The operating budget is the cost to run the service. The income target is the amount that we're looking to recover. And the actual income is obviously the actual amount of money that we receive.
Thank you very much, Gavin. I should have understood it. You've explained it very clearly and simply. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Peter. Right, Mike White on finance again.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, as you know, within the ward I represent, I've got 96% residents resident-only parking because of the Liberty Stadium. So my question really is about the funding to maintain these bays and for the maintenance of them. Just wondering whether out of the money generated, whether there was a set amount put in there for this work to be carried out, and also. Is this done on an actually rolling program? This works.
I'll be happy to answer that one, Chair, if I may.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's there's no set amount put in. As to give the example, Gavin just mentioned that this year there's a surplus, or last year there's a surplus of 300,000 from our parking enforcement. That money would just go into the highways budget per se. It's not put in there and then decided beforehand where it goes. But within the highway budget, in a direct answer to the question, part of the highway budget would incorporate the repainting and refurbishing of parking bay lines, yellow lines on the road, white lines, H-bars, all of that sort of infrastructure of the highway asset. It isn't, you can't predict it because you don't know what the surplus from car parking or enforcement is going to be. It just goes into the highway and helps to supplement the highway's budget. So I maybe perhaps one of the officers, Mark or Gavin, could help me on this bit about, is there a rolling program? My understanding is that, you know, there's obviously wear and tear will incur to all of our white line treatment on all of our roads and yellow line treatment, and it'll be refurbished on an as and when needed basis. I don't think, but I don't want to be misquoted, I don't believe that there is a rolling program as such. So in other words, I don't believe we have a process whereby every 3 years or 5 years we would renew all the the line treatment on our highways. It would very much fall into the category of our highway repair programme. So we don't have a designated time by which we resurface highways, for example. They are inspected annually, and then that work is carried out in accordance with the criteria set in that. So I would imagine that the same, Councillor White, is applied to in the white line treatment about the rolling programme, but definitely there is money put in the highways budget that can and is used for the renewal and replacement of line definitions around resident parking bays and yellow lines, etc.
Okay, Mike.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Chris Holly.
Thank you, Chair. Mark, can you explain, are any of the budgets that you have ring fenced?
Well,
especially in parking enforcement and what have you. I know they put into the central pot, but do you ring fence any money?
No, I mean, again, perhaps Gavin can come in and help me here a bit, but my understanding of ring fencing, the only ring fencing is that money can only be spent within those areas that are in the report of highways that where they can be used. So they can be used for highways improvement projects, a road improvement project, environmental improvement scheme, etc., etc. So there is a ring fencing of a sort that goes on, but it's all within the highways budget. They can't go outside of that highways budget. I think I'm correct in making that statement, Gavin, am I?
Yeah, yes, you are, Councillor. Basically, any surplus that is generated from civil parking enforcement has to remain in one of those highways schemes or type of projects that you just listed. Effectively, what it means is that the money is put back into highway improvements, road safety, parking, etc. What it means effectively is that the council can't then take that money and move it into, say, education or social services, as an example.
Could it be moved to park and ride? Can it be used to cut the cost of the park and ride? An example, one of the main functions of park and ride originally was that we took the income from park and ride and used it to reduce the cost of the bus back and forth to the city centre. So could the surplus be used for that?
In my opinion, it could, but again, I defer to Gavin for a more sort of determined answer. But in my opinion, it could be done. But
it can be done, and it has been done in previous years. We have used surplus from civil parking enforcement to where, for example, we haven't covered our operating costs on park and ride.
But we could use it to reduce the cost of the park and ride, i.e. the cost of the bus going back and forth.
But
yes, I would imagine so. Yeah, I don't see any reason why we couldn't do that then, Councillor Holly. Yes, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Right. My question next, in terms of the residents' parking bays, I've raised this with you before, Mark. As you know, we've now gone to a paperless residence permit system, so the permits aren't displayed on cars anymore. This makes it very difficult for residents in particular to know where those bays are being abused, and often they'll come to local council, they'll go straight to the report a parking problem email and say that their particular residents' parking bays are being used by non-residents, and could we get officers out there to enforce the bays, which happens quite regularly. Now, because they don't know, sometimes those officers will go out and they'll find that all the cars in those bays have proper permits. Now, if you go to the DVLA, you can find out online whether a car is taxed or whether it's insured. Would it be possible to do something similar with the council, whereby we could set up an app or something whereby people could put a number in, a registration number into the app, and it would tell you whether or not that they have a residence permit or not, which would save our officers time, but also enable us to maybe police residence parking bays more efficiently?
Right. Well, I'll leave that last part of the question to know what is feasible about an app and that sort of thing, and because there are queries, as you conscious of, with data protection and things like that, obviously, right? So Gavin come in, but at the outset, I mean, look, we've been asked the question, over a period of time about the paperless or the virtual permit system. What we have to remember as well is that was introduced. I know it's not been, to the wholeheartedly welcomed and supported by everybody in our communities, but part of the purpose for that was, there was a twofold reason for that approach in the beginning. It was we are moving towards getting as much paperless, within the council and the authority and everything we do. That was part of the reason, but also we've had a long, hard look at the cost of, because it's a free service, as we're all aware, the residence parking scheme is a privilege scheme in the sense that it's a not charged for scheme, so it's free, and the cost involved with issuing paper permits was an added burden and a strain on maintaining this free scheme. So by going paperless, although it wasn't wholeheartedly welcomed by all residents, in a way, it helped us to keep that scheme free. So, and then I understand about because I've been asked before, I've actually been, challenged by residents about, well, we want to be able to see who's got a scheme so we can challenge people on about parking. Yeah. And I'm saying to people, well, no. I don't want residents. I'm sure the authority doesn't want residents to go out there challenging people who they believe or not believe have the right to park in streets, because that's what we've got parking enforcement officers to do, and that's something really we should deter the public from wanting to take on, because you don't know, there could be hidden consequences for something like that. But certainly along the theme about, I know that you can get certain information, you are right, from the DVLA. What I'm not sure about is where we stand on data protection and whether that information that you're requesting could be almost available on demand or request. I'm not particularly sure about that. So maybe Gavin can shed some light, or that may be something that we can come back to as a scrutiny committee on. But okay. I'm a little bit nervous because of the the data protection laws around a lot of things. But Gavin, can you shed any light on that?
Yeah, I'll be honest, Councillor Thomas, I don't know the answer and where we would stand on providing such a service like the DVLA do in terms of where people can go online and check details of vehicles. So I think we'd have to come back on that one. In answer to Councillor Back's question about sending enforcement officers out to streets where we have reports of vehicles potentially not having RP permits, what we can do on our system is obviously we can do initial checks before we deploy officers to a site. So if, for example, we get an inquiry through with a vehicle, a resident thinks it's not got a valid permit, the officers can actually check it in the office to see if it's registered on our residents parking database. If it's showing as a valid permit, the officers then wouldn't need to attend. It would just be a quick response back to the resident or whoever made the inquiry. Obviously, if it's not showing at that point, then we'd obviously send officers out to check the bay, just to see if that vehicle was parked in contravention or if there were others as well.
Well, I guess if a resident came to you and said, "Is such and such car does such and such car have a permit?" and you came back to the residents and said it's okay, they have a permit, you've got your same data protection issues you have with regards to checking it online. But I'd be grateful if you could make some inquiries as to whether it's feasible. That'd be very, very helpful, and come back to us. That'd be great.
Yeah, just to clarify, Councillor Black, I certainly will, and we certainly will. We wouldn't actually respond back and say whether the vehicle had a permit or not. We just acknowledge that that we've done checks on that vehicle.
Okay, and then when the officer didn't come out, they'd know the answer. But
well,
yeah,
the thing is,
I know. We're going to get into all sorts of things. We'll wait till you to come back on that. That'd be very helpful. Thank you. Okay. Mike White, you're going to come a question on safety. And you're muted, Mike.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, in regards to the issue of safety within the report, paragraph 2.1, and the reason for street enforcement. I've happened to be once or twice going in the city centre, and I've seen vehicles actually parked on the new pavements. As you know, this is obviously a danger for pedestrians, but it's a danger for disabled people. But what can you tell me? What are the council taking any action by these motorists which blatantly park their vehicles on the pavements in the city centre?
Yeah,
you know,
I'm happy to answer that, Chair. If you're happy to. Yes, I mean, obviously, where we find motorists contravening any of the laws that we can enforce. So I know that's a bit of an indirect answer, but a lot of people aren't fully appreciative of what our limitations or our enforcement powers are. So if it's an unrestricted road and somebody parks on it, on the pavement, on an unrestricted road, we have no powers as an authority to take any enforcement action. That action can only be enforced by the police under the cause of obstruction. And my understanding with the police is they have to actually witness an obstruction taking place before they can take any of their own enforcement action. So now, whether it's a restricted road, so there's double yellow lines and there's people parking on that, or there's a no parking bay, etc., or loading bay, we have and we do take enforcement action and issue PCNs on them. So it's a question of, I mean, the difficulty we've got with the city centre and it's, you know, the core city centre is that we've designed it in a way where we've tried to avoid, because they're not always aesthetically pleasing. When you look at design in the King's Way, having it plastered with loads of signs, no parking, and loads of double yellow lines both sides does not add to its aesthetic look. So we try to protect it other ways by having so where there's access for vehicles onto pavements, we would look to put planters there, street furniture like benches and things like that, to avoid and restrict. And we do monitor the situation then. So if we do see abuse taking place, we will look to take further measures and amend any traffic regulation orders in response to that. But it is a bit of a fine balance, Mike, with not having, you know, protective measures, traditional protective measures plastered over what is meant to be an attractive looking street or a main thoroughfare of the city centre. But in answer to your question, where we can take enforcement action for illegal parking on pavements, we do. However, we cannot enforce all pavement parking because they don't come under our powers.
Okay, Mike?
Yes, thank you. As I
Okay.
said, my concern was with the Kingsway, was the amount of money that's been spent there, and then, you know, blatant damage.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, Peter Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My next question is with reference to section 8 of the report concerning what are called changing travel choices. I very much welcome this report and the emphasis the thought that has been given to the possibility of car drivers, van drivers who choose to use the park and ride scheme being given the option of cycling or indeed walking from the park and ride site into the town centre or wherever it happens to be that their destination is. This is a very welcome proposal, particularly in the light of concerns about carbon emissions, climate change and so forth. I'm just wondering whether Mark or one of the officers could update us, please, on progress in the provision of secure cycle parking on park and road ride sites. Thank you.
Yes, I'm more than happy to respond, Peter. As to date, we are developing two secure storage areas. One in the park and ride on Fabian Way. It's being constructed as we speak. Not quite ready to open to the public yet. And another one is under construction in the Quadrant car park as we speak. Again, not quite ready to open for use to the public, but imminent. So those are secure storage areas. We're also looking to develop cycle hubs, and there's one outside of McDonald's as well in Newcastle Gardens, but those are not secure storage. They are just bike parking spaces. And another plan we've still got and have had for a number of years, ever since the Santander bike scheme, was successful when that was launched. Obviously, COVID and the absence of students has affected its operation at the moment. But we initiated discussions with the university and Santander we've always had a desire to expand that into the city centre as well, because as you know, it goes from campus to campus, or in fact it goes all the way down to Mumbles. But we were looking 2 years ago at further expansion of that into the city centre. COVID has distracted us from that at the moment, but one of the key sites we are looking for as an extension to the Santander scheme as well to encourage cycling is the obvious link for anybody would say is the railway station in Swansea as well. So there's another desire there to do it. But as we speak, the 2 secure storage facilities are about to be launched by the authority. They've been or virtually been constructed, and within a short time we'll be ready to open them to the public.
That's great news in sense of encouraging more car drivers to be prepared at the very least to mix their travel modes between car, bicycle and walking. So thank you very much and well done. Thank you.
Will there be secure cycle storage in the new the car park related to the arena, Mark? Do you know?
I don't think there is any at the moment, but I'll turn to Gavin for advice on that one. Gavin, I don't know if there's any planned at the moment, but these are additions that we can relatively easily add. But perhaps Gavin can update us all on that.
Yeah, there will be secure parking in the north and south car parks for the arena.
For cycles, for bicycles.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the cycling theatre goes. Excellent. Okay. Right. Peter, you're still on the question on staffing?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mark Thomas, Councillor, is very much aware of my environmental concerns and my work with the nature conservation team, as indeed, of course, his own responsibilities have put him in a similar position. So I was slightly jaundiced when I read that there were, I think, 52 staff involved in parking services, including 37 carrying out civil and parking enforcement. Now, it may well be that those numbers are required, but when one considers that cars and the other motorised vehicles are major contributors towards carbon emissions and hence global warming, it bothered me slightly when I consider the difficulty that I know that the nature conservation team and I myself have had in trying to expand the enforcement activities that are needed in relation to development sites to protect nature on those sites. So I just wondered whether Mark or others had any particular comments they wish to make on what some might see as a rather unfortunate mix of priorities, given we've had COP26, we've had or will be having again COP15 in relation to nature protection, and yet we pour all these resources into parking for the vehicles that are causing the problem and very little into the people who are trying to solve the problem. Thank you.
Very much a question for you, Mark, I'm afraid.
Yes, it's a political question.
Sorry,
Right? An opposite question, absolutely. Right, and there's no one answer to this, to be truthful. I mean, look, obviously, we have got established. I mean, if you look at the the enforcement team associated with car parking, it's been around years. It's not something that's developed to these sort of numbers overnight. That's the first thing. This is part of a process because we have statutory duties and require. If you look in section, in the section of the report where it talks about why do we do it? Well, you've got safety reasons why you do it. There are economic reasons, and there are sustainability reasons as well. I mean, so I'll try and give you maybe several answers to it. Okay, so in the first place, the size and the scope of the teams have been around for years. So we have not suddenly made any changes to that. We haven't built it up over recent years, for example. But when you look at the 37 people, there are 37 people associated with parking enforcement, but out on the street, actually issuing enforcement notices and that, the team is 24. So we haven't got 37 people out there, issuing. 13 of them will be backroom staff issuing, including things like residence parking permits and permits for traders and all that. So the whole team is 37. The other difference is I mean, it came up on one of the earlier questions, and it's in the report. The actual service has to be a self-financing service. It cannot be a draw on resources of the authority. So every officer and every person employed in parking enforcement is paid for through the resources that that they raise, and any surpluses that are created through their work. So they are not, these are not people who are being directly paid for as such, or taking money out of existing budgets within the authority. It's very much a self-finances, whereas if you employ anybody in most other mainline services, they are an additional cost to that budget line. So, but the other thing is this, obviously I'm a cabinet member with responsibilities for parking enforcement. So the first part of the question is, we've got the number of officers that I believe is right to carry out the role that we are expected to do, because there might be people asking questions about the size and scale, but I can tell you this, I've never actually had, it's the first question I've ever had asking, have we got too many officers? But I get quite a lot of mail from residents, ward members, asking for more patrols and more presence from enforcement officers around their schools and communities that they live in. So it tends to be, I would say that, if you look at the sort of public pull on this, there are probably more shouts for more parking enforcement officers than there are for, are there too many? But I suppose then if you look at the whole picture, from my perspective as cabinet member with responsibilities, I think the size of the team and the functions they carry out is about right. It's fit for purpose. And there's no reason why I should change that. If there's another department that feels that they are understaffed or underfunded, well, that's an issue for another department and people with a higher pay grade than I've got, because I can't. The difficulty with that question, and I do understand where Councillor Jones is coming from, because he's passionate about the environment and all, the needs and the vital part that protecting the environment plays. But if you start measuring, is this service more deserving than that service, it's really a difficult area to get into. I can only speak for the service that's here. I mean, as I said, parking enforcement, I believe they do a very good job. They carry out, they have to keep the city and the suburbs moving. Think what life would be without them. And we haven't got that benefit of hindsight, because we've never been in a situation where we haven't had parking enforcement out there. But I can tell you it would not be a good place if we didn't have these guys and girls out patrolling our streets. We'd have real difficulties. And it wouldn't just be nuisance value to residents about where they can park outside their house. It's real practical differences around schools and safety, concerns. And it's also keeping businesses and trade moving as well. So that we have to manage our streets. In an ideal world, if everybody followed the rules and nobody did anything that they shouldn't be doing, then you could argue that we could decrease the numbers. But unfortunately, the numbers respond to practices that we experience. It's not hypothetical. If you look at the numbers of PCNs that are issued year on year, they tend to be relatively consistent. So the number of people we've got issuing those PCNs are in response to the type of behaviours that people are displaying. So as I said, perfect world stuff. Nobody would be committing offences. Nobody would be parking on pavements, which is much to the annoyance of Councillor White and the rest of us. And therefore, we wouldn't have to employ, numbers of people to carry that out. But really speaking, it's a bigger question, Councillor Jones, than just I can answer. And I think it's you need to have a wider input into that question from perhaps the rest of Cabinet or certainly other Cabinet members.
Chair, I'm sure that Councillor Mark Thomas realises that my question is partly tongue-in-cheek. I'm not suggesting that we have too many parking enforcement officers. I'm rather suggesting that we have too few nature environment support officers. I agree with him, it's a matter for another place, but it's just another opportunity, a kind of question by stealth, to try and remind Council that there is an issue there, and it's all about priorities. But thank you very much, Mark, for your answer. Thank you.
Okay, Lyndon Jones, you got a question on cleanliness.
Great, thank you, Chair. Afternoon, Mark. Our parking service is responsible for the cleanliness of car parks, which is an issue, as you know, we all get complaints about. And your report refers to officers involved in general cleaning maintenance of car parks. Can he clarify what this means and whether others are involved with the cleaning of car parks?
Yeah, I'll give you a sort of brief on whether Gavin or Mark want to come in on the more detail. But generally speaking, the general maintenance of car parks is down to our parks and cleansing teams, as you know, who do the road cleanliness and that. Car parks officers and staff are expected to sort of do the basic sort of litter picking about the place. But if there's a complaint, for example, about a poor condition of one of the multi-stories or something like that, that's something that would be, it obviously should be fed into car parks initially. So if anybody's got any concerns about any particular car parks, well, you corresponded with me earlier this week, Lyndon, and I forwarded that on to Richard Mears to look at and investigate. And then if it needs tackling, that'll be passed on then to our cleansing department to do. If it's a simple tidy up, I would expect that the staff in the car parks would look after that. But the general major cleansing of the buildings or the car parks themselves are carried out by our street cleansing teams effectively. Okay. I don't know if Gavin wants to add to that. Gavin, is there anything to add to that, or have I covered it?
I think you covered it perfectly, Councillor. Yeah, I mean, the main responsibility is for the cleansing team. However, we have car park staff patrolling, for example, the multi-stories. If if there are leaves, for example, in the autumn that get blown in, they'll go around with a broom and sort of swoop those up. Any litter, they'll go around and pick that up, just to try and keep the car park looking as tidy as it possibly can be. If we have some issues with antisocial behaviour and we're aware of that, it might be that we can get to the car park quicker than the cleansing team. For example, quite often we come across groups of people that congregate in the car parks eating various fast foods, and they'll just leave all the rubbish in the car park and drive off. So, for example, we're out and about daily emptying the machines, checking the machines. If our staff come across something like that, they'll obviously clear it rather than leave it for the cleansing team.
Okay, great, thank you. It is obviously about our image, and obviously in the summer, is that regime upped as well? Because obviously the number of visitors to those car parks, especially the beaches, increases, and it is, as I say, part of our image, what people see and think of Swansea. Okay,
thank you, Lyndon. Thanks everyone. Right, I've got Alexander Roberts wants to come in.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just asking a question, really, perhaps this is to Gavin on the technical side, and it's continuing along the sort of same theme that Councillor Black was hinting at, perhaps around research and development and the investment in as a parking operation. This is in particular reference to car parks now. I'm interested to know, especially with the increased car parking capacity that's coming on the back of the new car parks that are in the city centre especially, what level of investment, there is a surplus, you've been talking about that surplus that seems to be across the board in relation to car parks, where that money might be going into looking at how making car parking smarter within Swansea. Certainly as a user of car parks, I frequently don't use sometimes half of the allotted time I pay for in a car park. I'm wondering whether or not the council is looking at monitoring the use versus the number of people actually utilising the car park. So how many people in an hour pay for an hour but never use the hour or even use half of that? How much money are people actually spending but not using it at time-wise as a potential question, as a challenge to the council? And are we looking at any kind of smart payment systems where people can pay perhaps online in reference, a bit like London do with the congestion charge? If you use a car park and you only use it for 20 minutes, how about only paying for 20 minutes? Are we looking at any of those types of areas, please?
Okay. We'll leave this to Gavin, Mark? Or?
Yes, happy for Gavin. I'm happy to come in on it, but Gavin is more closely associated with that, yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. Okay, we at the minute we've got 2 new car parks coming online, hopefully next year, in relation to the Copper Bay development and the arena. because of where they are built, we've actually lost St Mary's Surface and the Oystermouth Road Pay and Display car park. As part of the redevelopment as well, St David's multi-storey car park is due to be demolished. So in terms of net gain of car parking spaces, I think there's a net gain of 36 spaces off the top of my head. So we're not actually increasing, we're just kind of balancing it out. Now, both of those car parks will be fitted with pay on foot ANPR technology. So there won't be barriers on the entrance. There will be barriers on the entrance, but there won't be tickets. There'll be ticketless machines. So very similar to the technology that we've recently installed in the Quadrant and at our park and ride sites as well. So it'll be the same system, and the charging will be again the same. It will be, you'll pay per hour, but you will pay when you return to your vehicle, rather than with pay and display where you have to purchase a ticket before you leave your vehicle. This, you obviously pay on your return. We do offer cashless parking, pay by phone and pay by app, and that is something we've recently rolled out, but again it's only in periods of hours rather than minutes. I don't know what my honest answer is. I don't know what the appetite would be like for actually sort of bringing that period down to sort of number of minutes. I mean, you could potentially introduce parking charges in sort of 30-minute chunks or 20-minute chunks, as we have done on street in certain areas in the city centre. We've got short-term on-street parking areas. So, you know, that I guess in the technologies there to do it, it's just whether there would be whether that's something that the council wanted to explore further. I mean, I don't know what the appetite would be for that, but I mean the technology could be there.
It's very interesting suggestion that you suggest that the technology might support pay by minute, especially if you're paying when you leave, then it's an exact amount of time that the system knows you've been there for, because it's logged presumably by automatic car registration recognition. So just as with the other Park Towie car parks and all those, it'd be very interesting if that was something that could be explored.
There's obviously needs to be some element of sort of flexibility, because I mean, for example, once you've paid at the pay station, you're obviously sort of given sort of 10 minutes then to get back to your vehicle and obviously make your way to the barrier, etc. So it's so there is an element of sort of grace there and sort of flexibility, shall we say? But yeah, I mean, what we've tried to do is increase as much flexibility as possible in terms to allow people to pay for their parking. So we offer in cash, card, contactless, pay by app, pay by phone. And obviously, as with anything, technology is evolving all the time, and we are part of the British Parking Association. We're part of the BPA Wales group. We speak with our colleagues in other authorities and colleagues in the private sector as well, to try and ensure that we're providing a service that is as up to date and current and customer friendly as possible.
Okay, I tried to pay by app in Port Island last summer, but I couldn't get a signal, so that was a problem. But there we are. I thought I saw a report saying we had a net loss of 15 spaces after all the things were taken into account.
Yes, I Councillor Buck, yeah, I believe that's right. I mean, Gavin wasn't sure, but my understanding is, yes, once with the erection of the 2 new buildings and the removal of the other 3 car parks, including the St David's, there would be a net loss, is my understanding, of 15.
Yeah.
Gavin wasn't far off. He did say it was close.
It was close enough, yeah.
But it's not a slight gain, it's a slight loss, it is, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, you are right, and I should have got that right because I wrote the report and I've put it here in 1.4. So where I got 36 from, my apologies. I wasn't trying to mislead anybody.
No problem. Councillor Fitzgerald, Wendy, do you want to?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I was just going to raise a plea for the suburbs of Swansea, where often ward members do pay to have traffic regulation orders put in place. And it can be quite difficult getting anyone out to actually do a bit of policing of the lines that are in place. I had a situation where a business was being operated from a property involving car recovery, and despite sending regular emails about cars parked in a restricted parking area close to the property, nothing was done. I think one was there for 3 weeks and another was there for about the same time. One was eventually removed on the back of a lorry because it hadn't been taxed since 2017, and another, well, the guy that had recovered it finally removed it. So, you know, we do have parking problems in the suburbs. We have cars parked on pavements, blocking pavements near the school, causing difficulties for parents. You know, all these sort of things are going on in the suburbs of Swansea. And I'm told that we do get regular patrols of parking enforcement officers, though I'm not exactly sure how often that regular inspection takes place. But, you know, in the midst of all the discussions that we've had, focusing mostly on the city centre, please can you remember that in the suburbs, the outer reaches of Swansea, we do have double yellow lines. We do have notices saying no parking between so many hours, even if it's just a single yellow line. But it goes on all the time, and we don't see enforcement officers that often. So I'm just making that point, Chair.
I believe, Wendy, that you can actually get a report on activity by parking officers in any particular street at any one particular time, because they're all tracked on the vehicles. So I think if you wanted to back this up, perhaps you would get those reports, and maybe you could then take it up with the officers if you felt you weren't getting the appropriate attention. Yeah,
well, shall we say I have looked at that option. Yeah,
Mark.
Yeah, I just to add a bit, look, I do understand the frustration, and you know, it's not that we only consider or care about the city centre. If you look at volume and demand, there are more cars and more offences being created in the city centre than there are out in the suburbs. It's a straightforward, you know, maths thing. But you know, that doesn't mean to say we can or should, and I don't believe we do, neglect the suburbs. I mean, I live in a suburb, and you know, but we respond as well, and then this is where ward councillors' information is very helpful. I've, on a number of occasions, I've requested parking enforcement to attend to a school, for example, and to certain hotspot areas within wards, because ward councillors have written to me. They can also write directly to the service, you know, and Gavin is very approachable, and we look at any request. But certainly if you don't feel that you're getting the recognition or the service you expect from the department, that, you know, but there is, you know, we do expect our officers to go out and cover the whole of Swansea. It's done on a bit of a pro rata basis. Obviously, they're not in Penclough as often as they are in the city centre, and I wouldn't expect them to. But if we've got challenges, particularly about, you know, I've asked and deployed the, you know, the mobile camera unit to many a school in Swansea, many a school. The difficulty we got as well, it's a bit, remember I was saying, because, you know, it's a bit, and I'm not passing it back, and I know it sounds like excuses when you, look, I have residents like all of us have, and trying to get our residents to understand that we cannot enforce parking on the pavement is only taken as an excuse, or we duck in the issue. No matter how many times I tell residents that, you know, in my ward, that it's not an enforceable issue by us, it's the police, it is often seen as passing the buck. It's not. If we can't enforce, we can't enforce. The law dictates that, not us. But the same with the camera van. The camera van has specific uses. We can't use it for all parking offences. We can do bus stops. We can do school outside schools. And now I'm struggling. Gavin will help me out with this. But there's a
waiting areas as well.
Yeah, there's only a few areas. So, you know, because it's much to our frustration, because if the camera van could patrol all of Swansea and pick up any offences, because it's much more efficient, because it covers more ground than enforcement officers on foot can do. But we have to work, as I said, within the law. So, but if you do get frustrated, if you feel you're not having the response or the attention from the service, please contact me, and I will chase it up. And I've done that on many occasions because, we have to make sure that, as far as I'm concerned, a school in my ward is as important and needs, patrolling as much as a school in any ward. So, I'm very responsive to those sort of requests that come in. Okay. And I know the services. And Gavin, I don't know if you want to add anything to it because
I think you've covered it, Mark. We've got a lot on the agenda, so I want to just got two last questions from Chris Holly and Will Thomas, and then we're going to move on to the next item. Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If you go to, I want to ask a question about 8.5 on the report, 8.5 park and ride locations. To the best of my knowledge, we've been looking for one in the west of the city. Well, the best part of 30 years, park and ride. And also we've been looking at the north when we had one in Forest Park and it was removed because it was thought to be too close to the city centre. And we looked to sites out as far as Velindre and others. And now we're going to look for a new site for Orlando Park and Ride, potentially, because of any interest there. It says future studies are necessary to determine the feasibility of potential park and ride sites north and west, the north and the west of the city. Can I ask Mark or any of the officers on the call, have any preliminary examined, any sites been examined preliminary, and if possible, when this information is available, if it can be made available to members? Thank you.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Joe. I'll have a go at answering that. Certainly in part, we I can't remember where. I'm not very good on timescales, but the report on I attended a scrutiny in the last 3-4 months. Yeah. And I can't remember the title of the scrutiny where this alternative arrangement for park and ride was discussed at length. But we are still looking at alternatives and ruling in or ruling out some locations that will serve the west and the north of the city. Now, I don't know, and maybe Mark or Stuart would be able to come in here about, I'm not quite sure of when we'll be in a position. We certainly have not chosen a site yet, I know that much. But I don't know when we're likely to be in a position where a site will be chosen or when we'll be in a position to publish that, because I know there was a long list that we were going through and sort of considering what would work and what wouldn't work. But the last discussions I had on this, we weren't anywhere near a down to the last one sort of thing. So I'm looking perhaps Stuart or Mark could come in and give any further updates on that I'm not aware of.
Okay, you are right. This was covered in quite some detail by one of these scrutiny panels. So unless Mark has anything to add to that, we're going to move on. No? Okay, so Will Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I got my daughter here at the moment, so she might chirp up in a minute.
She got a question for us?
she'd have hundreds. My question really, I noticed obviously the parking enforcement officers going around in twos, and obviously that's, I'm guessing, for their safety a lot of the time. Obviously that isn't great for productivity then, because obviously you could cover twice as much ground. I'm just wondering how we find the sort of threats towards officers these days, and whether the sort of body cams are, have they got body cams, and if so, are they working in reducing the number of sort of threats and abuse towards them? And are we almost in a position where the body cameras are good enough to just send the officers out on their own? Thanks.
That, in order of time, Chair, I think, for Gavin would be better equipped to answer that. He'd know more of the detail of that.
Yeah, Gavin? Where's Gavin gone?
Yep, sorry, I'm here. Sorry, I couldn't get myself off mute. Very briefly, unfortunately, we are still getting a lot of hostility towards our officers. They do have body cams. We do use we do use the footage to aid with police investigations, and we're always looking at ways that we can operate more efficiently. Obviously, the safety of our staff is our #1 priority and concern, and if there's anything that we can do that will enable the officers to work more efficiently, then that's what we will do. So we're reviewing the way that we operate as a service all the time. We have in the past tried lone working. It has caused some issues. What we try and do is deploy officers to an area, and then, for example, one will do one street, the other will do the other, or if they're working on the same street, one will do one side, the other officer will do the other side. So appreciate though, sometimes when they're seen walking together, that's quite often maybe if they're walking to an area that they're going to be enforcing. But yeah, it's something that we are monitoring, and if there are any ways that we can work more efficiently, then we will. Okay, thank you for that. Right, I think we've exhausted this topic. Thank you very much, Mark, and your officers for answering the questions. We will write to you with any views we have on this particular issue and any issues we want to further answers on. So thank you very much for that indeed. Much appreciated. Thank you. Right, next item 7 is the Scrutiny Performance Panel Progress Report. And Councillor Peter Jones has provided a short report. Do you want to very briefly introduce the report, Peter?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will do so briefly. I assume everyone has read and had a chance to think about the report. I think I just wanted to emphasise, first of all, the importance of the work that this panel has a responsibility for. We're talking now in the era of COP26. We've had COP15 in relation to the global nature emergency. And of course, Council just over a month ago passed the nature emergency motion. So we're all, I hope, aware of the seriousness and the global issues that this panel, in the context of Swansea, has a responsibility to respond to. And if you just look at the topics of the meetings we've had since 19 May, climate, of course, air quality management, and air quality, of course, is now identified as a major killer in the UK and worldwide, and it's therefore important to address what, if anything, the Council can do to mitigate that. The issue of ash tree dieback, which is a serious issue, of course, for our nature here in Swansea and across the United Kingdom. And then, of course, the issues of local flood risk management, which, of course, is a growing issue in relation to the impacts of climate change, particularly in the context of Swansea as a coastal city. And of course, water pollution. We take water for granted. We take fresh water and clean, safe fresh water for granted, but we shouldn't. So these are the kind of issues that the panel has been addressing since the last report that I was able to give to the committee. And I'm also pleased to report that I, as chair of the committee, or panel, sorry, we've now reinstituted a series of meetings approximately every 6 weeks, together with the cabinet member, Andrea Lewis, and with Nature Conservation Team Leader, Deb Hill, and her Planning Superior, Paul Meller, to oversee and to discuss and update one another with issues in the biodiversity field. I also engage, of course, with outside organisations that have an interest in the biodiversity issue here in Swansea and beyond. So I think the panel has worked extremely well since its creation just over 2 years ago, and I hope it will be a continuing and successful contributor to the work of the Council. That's all I have to say, Chair, but happy, obviously, to answer. Oh, could I just add, I'd like to thank Emily Davis, who provides excellent support on behalf of the scrutiny team to myself and to the panel. But I'm happy to answer any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Anybody got any questions or points they want to raise with Peter at all? No? Okay, thank you very much for that, Peter. We'll note that report, which is very helpful, very useful and very thorough. Okay, next item is the Scrutiny Dispatches report, which has been circulated. Can I have agreement that this can be presented to Council on the 27th of January? I'm going to take silence as assent unless someone shouts no now. Good, excellent, thank you. Item 9 is membership of scrutiny panels and working groups. There's no changes to those at all. Item 10 is the scrutiny work programme. You'll note that the next committee meeting, we got the leader to talk about a whole range of issues, including Brexit, city centre regeneration, etc. And we've also got the Public Services Board scrutiny as well, looking at their annual report and the wellbeing objectives. Just to note that the Road Safety Working Group, which is planned for February 2022, has had to be cancelled because of officers under too much pressure to be able to deal with it. So that's going to be postponed till after the May elections. But we are having further meetings of the Workforce Working Group and the Bus Services Working Group before the end of this municipal year. So those working groups, so I think a lot of our scrutiny work has been impacted by the pressures on officers caused by the pandemic, and unfortunately that's just unavoidable. Hopefully after the elections we'll be able to get off to a much better start and do a lot more work than we have been able to do. I know I had a question from the member of the public regarding charging electric vehicles at home where they don't have access, where basically their terrace properties don't have access to a drive. That's been referred to Andrew Lewis and Mark Thomas as the cabinet members, and depending on the response we may come back to that as a committee to have a look at that, to see whether it's worth doing any further scrutiny on that. So those are that. Any comments on those at all? No? Okay, thank you. Item 11, scrutiny letters for noting. Item 12, the date and time of upcoming scrutiny panel meetings, also for noting. And that brings us to item 13, which is the exclusion of the public to look at the proposed leasehold acquisition and redevelopments of 279 Oxford Street and 25 to 27 Princess Way. So I'm going to formally move under paragraph 14 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 that the public should be excluded. Can I have any agreement to that, please? Yes, everyone's happy with that. Lovely. I see people showing their hands. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So we're going to move on to that item now. I don't suppose we've got many. Do we need to make sure no public are in here, Caroline, or
Just going to stop the recording now, Chair. We'll stop the live stream. Thank you.
Okay, we'll give you a chance. Let me know when you've done that and we'll move